Tour de France has completed half of its fabled Grand Circle, with the finish on the Champs-Élysées growing ever nearer. But now, after a day's rest, thoughts of Paris must be put aside because a new challenge lies ahead, the soaring Pyrenees. The two-time defending champion, Lance Armstrong, is riding the momentum of the last two stages in the Alps, where he produced a pair of astonishing victories. First, leaving the world's best gasping in his wake on the mighty Alpe d'Huez, then storming from behind in the uphill time trial. But Armstrong still does not wear the yellow jersey of race leader, as he must before the mountain's end. Can he slip the maillot jaune over his shoulders in the Pyrenees, as he has done so emphatically in the past? The answer lies in the miles ahead. 3 key mountain stages along the Spanish border. The Tour de France resumes its epic journey through the Pyrenees on OLN next. After a well-earned day of rest, the riders in the 88th Tour de France have journeyed from the Alps to the Pyrenees. They will begin along the Mediterranean coast in Perpignan and then ride uphill to Aix-les-Thermes and the Plateau de Bonascre. Hello, everyone. I'm Bob Varsha. Welcome back to our live OLN coverage of the 88th Tour de France. Once again, we have some brutal weather, although the sun is trying to peek through, and hopefully things will look better by the time the peloton reaches us. After a day off, all eyes will be on the two-time defending champion, Lance Armstrong, who in the past has not necessarily won stages here in the Pyrenees, but he has taken major time away from his rivals. And that's what he hopes to do again, because he is still not in the yellow jersey. And for Lance, now is the time. Here's a look at the GC as we started stage 12 in Perpignan. Francois Simon of France is in the yellow jersey, with Andrei Kivilev, a dangerous climber from the Cofidis team, just 11 minutes, 1 second back. And then Lance Armstrong, 13 minutes, 7 seconds behind after winning 2 straight stages. Joseba Baloki, last year's third-place finisher, is right there as well, 16 minutes, 17 seconds behind. And then Jan Ullrich, the German, the 97 winner, just 16 minutes, 41 seconds out. 6th through 10th, Christophe Moreau, who spent the early portion of the tour in the yellow jersey. Another terrific climber, Igor Gonzalez de Galeano from the Once team. Then Oscar Sevilla, who wears the white jersey of best young rider. Santiago Botero, last year's king of the mountains. And Stuart O'Grady, who has spent more time in the yellow jersey than any other rider. As you can see, the heavy hitters have come to the front. Other riders of note, Laurent Jalabert with 2-stage win is in 11th place. Further back, Bobby Julich of the United States lost some time in the mountains. He is now 42 minutes, 20 seconds back. Fellow American Jonathan Vaughters with Crédit Agricole, 50 minutes, 58 seconds, but he is coming. And Kevin Livingston with the Telecom team, 52 minutes, 21 seconds back. Look for him to be right there with Ullrich today. And then there's George Hincapie from the U.S. Postal Service team, nearly 1 hour back. But as always, his job will be to escort Lance Armstrong up the mountains. With that, now let's get the thoughts of our race calling team. Once again, here are Phil Liggett and Paul Sherwen.
Thanks, Bob. Well, things move quick in the Tour de France. Not only has the cloud blown away with the high winds in the Pyrenees moments ago, the abandon of Christophe Moreau, and that was a big surprise, 6th overall in the Tour.
A big shock for everybody, with the riders today moving into the Pyrenees for the first time, and that is certainly going to be a very difficult route for them. Yes, as Bob said, they're leaving behind them the Mediterranean coast, and it will be a race inland. The first climb of the day really is a very difficult one as they move away from Perpignan on the 166-kilometer course. The first part of the course today, the 40 kilometers, is flat, but after that it's up into the high Pyrenees, with the first very difficult climb of the day, the Col de Joux, coming out at 1,500 meters in altitude before plunging back down into the valley to Axat and Quillon. And then it's over a very long, tough plateau with a couple of second category and third category climbs along the way, but the final descent, the Col de Joux, is very difficult into Aix-les-Thermes before the final ascent up to the finish. And I tell you one thing, Phil, that first climb of the day is going to be very difficult if they race hard over it. Then the Col de Coudon, Col de Sept Frères, and the finish is a lot more difficult than I thought it was going to be.
Well, looking now at Paolo Bettini here, he's just started a move on the Col de Joux. We're around about 60 kilometers into the race. The riders coming up here pretty gently all day, but since they've started the slopes, and what you can see are very narrow roads here in the area known as the Pyrenees Oriental and on into the department of the Aude. And a breakaway containing Paolo Bettini, Kurt van der Wouw of Belgium, Daniel Atienza of Spain, Thomas Brogina of Poland, Stuart O'Grady of Australia has made this breakaway, Patrice Algan and Laurent Roux, the hero of the crossing of the Alps up to Alpe d'Huez. Now, this is a very interesting composition, Paul, and indicating that the big riders at the top of the leaderboard are trying desperately to get an easier day out of this one because of the 2 days to come.
Well, there are 3 very difficult days in the Pyrenees. This first stage is obviously the easiest one of the 3, but the final ascent here up to the finish line is absolutely atrocious. It's interesting to see that a lot of riders are trying to get off the group to small form breakaway right now, but the big shock of the day, Phil, really is that abandon of Christophe Moreau, the Frenchman who won the prologue time trial. He was very upset with his time trial performance a couple of days ago up to the summit there in the Alps, and we can see him in the team car right now. That is a sad day for him and a sad day for France. This is the man who finished 4th in the Tour de France last year.
What a turnaround in form. This man, the winner of the prologue and the leader of the Tour for 2 days, now out of the race on the first day. We should have suspected something was going wrong because he's refused to talk to the press for the past 2 days. And yesterday, on the rest day, he cancelled his press conference. And here we are. He's taken the start this morning and moments ago retired from the Tour. Well, these are live pictures, and we're now looking at the shadow of Paolo Bettini, because almost unbelievably, we've gone from dense cloud and rain into brilliant sunshine. Now, how about that for luck, Paul?
I could never have predicted that. The rain was absolutely atrocious this morning looking out of the hotel window, and even just moments ago, the thick cloud was down here on the finish line. But I think it's the huge winds that have been blowing across this part of France at the moment that have completely cleared up the skies, and the riders are going to be very happy with this, especially with the fact that that dangerous descent of Schula is now going to start to dry under the sun that's coming over the Tour right now.
And there he is, Christophe Moreau, following from the comfortable seat in the Tour de France now, and he won't be at all happy about that. He'll be a very sad man indeed.
Well, no question about that. He is not the first rider from the Festina team to drop out, but Christophe Moreau, last year's 4th place finisher, leaves us with but 165 riders still in the field. 7 teams with their complete complement of 9 riders. We'll be back and just come back to our live pictures. You haven't missed much as you watch the U.S. Postal Service riders picking up the front of the peloton. They are 23 seconds behind a breakaway group of 8 riders out front. But the big news, if you're just joining us, moments ago, Christophe Moreau of the Festina team, last year's 4th place finisher, who started the day 6th in the running order, 18 minutes 21 seconds behind the yellow jersey, suddenly abandoned. His teammates dropped back to assist him. They had no idea what was wrong, but he climbed off the bike and into the team car. He is done. Once again, here's Phil Liggett and Paul Sherwen.
The twists and turns as we climb the Pyrenees Occidental, and the pace being set at the front here now by the boys from Jean de la Tour. This is a nice little breakaway here, Paul, because nobody really that Lance Armstrong's team want to chase at the moment.
There's not one dangerous man in this group for Lance Armstrong, but I tell you one thing, Phil, they are on the front of the main field at the moment, keeping the pressure very high. They've actually stabilized the gap of this small breakaway to 20 seconds. I think they want to keep the group together as long as possible. But these last 2 days have been a serious rest for the U.S. Postal Service team, which has had a very hard time going through the Alps. We've seen, in fact, not one of the U.S. Postal Service riders, apart from Lance Armstrong, actually tried in that mountain top time trial. They took it as a rest day, and they've had 2 rest days on the run. And now they've come out fighting because they realize in the next 3 days, Armstrong has to get the yellow jersey away from Francois Simon. And that is, I think, why they're chasing the group down right now.
And this man wants to get points in that polka dot competition after his wonderful escape across the Alps. He was caught just a couple of kilometers from the finish by Lance Armstrong. He still hung on to finish 7th, but Laurent Roux there trying now to get a few more points and stay in the lead. He's in an area he knows well now because this is his region. As we hear from the race radio that, in fact, Jonathan Vaughters has been dropped by the main field now for Crédit Agricole, and that doesn't sound good. This fast tempo is hurting
It's always very strange after a rest day because a lot of riders have a hard time with the rest day. In fact, many of them not really enjoying it because it breaks up the body rhythm. And when you go into the mountains after a rest day, it is even worse, especially if the legs have got a little bit swollen from that big transfer on the plane. Strangely enough, this transfer by plane really affects athletes more than normal people. Most people have probably taken the aeroplane and found that their shoes are a little bit too tight once they want to get off after a long flight. But the same thing happens to the whole of an athlete's legs. They seem to get a bit of water retention, which is why they then need to go out and ride the bike for 3 or 4 hours. But in Perpignan yesterday, the weather was not very clement at all, and many riders only getting the chance to ride an hour or an hour and a half.
Well, I cannot believe the way the weather has changed. We are still something like, 90 kilometres away from the riders. They're coming towards us at the finish here in Axleterre. But the sun has miraculously appeared overhead, and it's also here at the finishing line as well now. There's the peloton, fast tempo, stringing them out. The breakaway, the best placed man in that breakaway is the man who's annoyed everybody since the race began, Stuart O'Grady. He lies 10th in the classification now. 21 minutes and 48 seconds. This is the region when we've all talked of Stuart dropping off, and this man has found a fabulous pair of legs this year. He's having a wonderful tour, and he's looking forward to a great finish in Paris. The gap being monitored here by the peloton, 22 seconds. They're not really allowing it to get away. The climbs here are very long, very steady. They're a different type of climb to what we'll experience tomorrow when we go into the steep granite rocks of the high Pyrenees. Now, there was snow up there yesterday, believe it or not. The weather was so cold. As we drove down from the Alps, we could see the Pyrenees and the white peaks. This morning we couldn't because the fog was down. It was heavy rain. But the weather changing this time so quickly, the riders have a right to be worried about what might come in the next 2 days of racing. This is Ekimov of US Postal driving the group on. They've already, if they haven't got enough problems with injuries, Stefan Jägaard has fallen off again today. It took him a long time to rejoin, but he has got back. But I wonder now if he's got the opposite side of his shorts ripped out as to the one he got the other day in the Alps.
Big difference between the Pyrenees and the Alps is actually the surface of the road. If you look here, this road has actually been resurfaced, but they actually have a very rough surface in the Pyrenees, which makes the road not very rolling, and it really saps one's strength. The race in the month of June, which takes place here, the Midi Libre, is a very difficult race, and it gets so hot at that time of the year that in fact the surface of the road starts to melt, and the riders feel as if they're stuck to glue. Very often they say that the glue is on the outside of the tyres instead of on the inside.
Yes, now there's a chance to see Stuart O'Grady. He's splendid in green, the only Australian to wear that colour in a Tour de France, something that Phil Anderson never did, and he's without doubt the most accomplished cyclist Australia have ever known as far as road racing goes. There he is, O'Grady now, a real threat to win that competition. I know Australian's done that, and his challenger is Eric Zabel, who's back in the main field. If this breakaway were to escape, and it was to succeed, then O'Grady would have built himself a useful lead in the points competition. But it's a bit early to suggest that because we are 99 kilometres to go. There is Laurent Roux wearing the red number. That is for the most aggressive rider. That's not for punching your mate, by the way. That is for attacking more often than most. And he's the leader of the combativity, they call it, as we now see an attack going from the main field here. Now, they don't have a breakaway man in there, Telecom. This could well be, and it is, Alexander Vinokourov.
Well, Vinokourov will put a bit of pressure on Armstrong's US Postal Service team. This man, although at the moment a very long way down in the overall standings, is going up there as a policeman for the Team Telecom. Telecom played into the hands of Armstrong a couple of days ago in the Alps when everybody thought that Armstrong was having a hard time. Even the great Eddie Merckx, I was talking to Eddie Merckx just before the start of the event today, and he said, I really couldn't believe at the slow speed that the race was going that Armstrong was in difficulty. And I decided that either he was really suffering or playing a game of poker. And he played a game of poker, I think, not only with all of the television commentators, but also with most of his opponents as well. Vinokourov about to get across this 20-second gap right now. And once he gets there, we'll see, I think, the main field being lifted up in pace once more by US Postal.
Well, that's amazing. It shows you how close they were to the peloton. He's literally sprinted across the gap. But that's put some firepower up there now, because now Team Telecom have got a man up here. That means they will not try to assist in the chase behind. This is the man most respected by the Telecom team after Jan Ullrich. And Ullrich will be delighted if he makes it, because he's pretty well up overall. 29 minutes behind, 22nd in the race classification. And he was part of the big escape of nearly a week ago now that gained over half an hour. And he punctured very early on and fell back into the pack. Otherwise, the pack wouldn't have allowed that breakaway to have gone so far. Once he was caught back, the postal team stopped chasing. Another man coming back. This is the leader of the Kelme team, Santiago Botero. This is starting to look a bit interesting.
Well, this is what we expected on this stage. We expected to see the green and white jerseys of Kelme coming onto the attack. They have said they want to make it very difficult for Lance Armstrong over the next 3 days.
And Paul, as we see Botero get up front, we just hear that Eric Zabel, the man who's pushing O'Grady most for that green jersey, has been dropped by the main field. Now, is he suffering today?
Well, Eric Zabel will try and make sure he can stay in a group at the back of the race. But as I said earlier, it's always very difficult the day after a rest day to have good legs, especially if you haven't been able to ride for 3 or 4 hours. And the weather conditions last night in Perpignan were absolutely disgusting. A lot of rain and a lot of wind, so many of the riders not probably getting the ride that they wanted to. Don't discount Eric Zabel quite as quickly as that, because he is a tough competitor and he will fight all the way to the finish. Again, another rider from Once coming on the attack here. This is Carlos Sastre. He's pretty high in the overall rankings as well. Now, this is the big plan of the Spaniards today. They've got a lot of riders in the top 10 or 15 places, and they certainly want to make the race difficult. And today, for the first time, Phil, driving up the climb, we started to see the Basque flag. We didn't see too many Spanish supporters in the Alps, but we're just across the border from Spain here right now. And I think the Spaniards will really want to ride, because they feel almost as if they're on home ground.
Well, Botero, who's just come up, he's the best placed in the classification now. He's 9th in the race, 21.5 minutes behind. Sastre is 19th. But this is beginning to get a little bit unmanageable, I think. The Spanish riders are coming into play because we were racing towards Spain. We're actually commentating, and Spain is literally 30 or 50 miles away, no more than 100 kilometers, and that's via the Principality of Andorra, which is predominantly Spanish anyway. And they want to ride well today, because the Basque flags of northern Spain are flying on the mountain tops here. You think there'd been an invasion into France, and the Spanish are expected now to ride extremely well. And here we go again. Now, is this Roberto Leiseca, who rode so well in the time trial?
I would expect it is. He's riding superbly, this man. He said he wanted to ride well when we came into the mountain passes, and certainly as he leaps out of the gap there, this is Leiseca. He was a great revelation to us in the Tour of Spain, a very good bike rider. One of the reasons why the Society Tour de France wanted this Euskaltel-Euskadi team to take part in the event, and they are promised to be aggressive, and so far they certainly have been. Armstrong's team is going to have to be very alert over the next 3 days, but I think this will play into the hands of US Postal Service, because they need the race to be very difficult.
Well, this is amazing. To see how this breakaway is building. It began with 8, and now we're up to 11, and we're shortly to be 12. And all the ones joining late are Spanish, which is significant. Now, you can't expect Lance Armstrong's team to control the way they are riding at the moment. He's watching who is moving across from the bunch to the breakaway, and he's assessing whether they are going to be important to him long term. And he can't waste his team at this moment so early on, because the 2 days to come are extremely difficult, and he's going to watch and wait. We've got the giant climbs of the Pyrenees to come over the weekend. There we are. David Echeverria, the team captain, says hello, Roberto. Take my wheel and I'll just put you in the leading group, and well done. So now we've got 2 riders from the same team here.
This was to be expected. Now then, Roberto Leiseca at the back here will try and recuperate just for a few moments, and then possibly as we get closer to the summit of this mountain, try and launch an attack off the front. Stewie O'Grady there in the green jersey is doing an absolutely fantastic ride, because at the moment he's riding up alongside an awful lot of climbers. This is a great day for him. If the breakaway was to go clear, he's actually got a points race, a points classification out on the course, where he could get himself an increase in his advance over Eric Zabel in the green jersey competition.
Well, an interesting tale is that Stuart O'Grady, apparently they found out the number of his hotel, and the faxes have been arriving so thick and fast. He had over 150 that the fax machine ran out of paper, and the hotel is threatening to charge him for it.
They wanted to charge him £1 for every fax that he received, and that would make a little bit of a dent in his pocket at the moment. Another rider coming across here with 1 kilometre to go to the summit of this climb, the first big climb of the day, the Col de Joux, and these riders are all leaping out of the pack. This is Carlos Sastre, and the main field there still being led by US Postal Service. I think, Phil, we will probably see a general regrouping on the descent, because their advantage at the moment is not very much more than 20 seconds.
Well, this is the attack now by Sastre. No, this is Gonzalez de Galliano here. as he comes up. So the camera tricked us there. They've gone back and picked him up. He's joining the leaders. Now, this man has been a sensation right throughout here. He rode so well in the prologue when he was second. Then he's had some good results in the mountains, and now he lies 7th overall. Now, this is a man, I think, that the US Postals cannot afford to allow any leeway. Now, we did read in the French papers this morning that Galdiano, this rider we're looking at now, Jan Ullrich and Bolocchi had a plan to break Armstrong. I wonder if this is phase 1.
Well, they called it the plan anti-Armstrong, and they're in a very strong position. Armstrong is the sole leader of US Postal Service. Roberto Heras lost a lot of time so far, but there are 3 riders from Once very high up in the standings, and each one of them is reasonably close. Bolocchi is the best placed rider. He's just behind Armstrong in 4th position in the overall standings. Then they've got Igor Gonzalez de Galdiano. Those 2 riders now are in the leading group. They also have Serrano, who's 13th, 25 minutes behind. That is going to put a lot of pressure on Armstrong over these Pyrenean stages. He is a great climber himself, but what this will do, these attacks by these teams of the Spaniards, will isolate him very early on in the stage.
Well, they're saying now that the peloton has reacted and are closing in, but I don't see them in this picture here. As we look at the leaders start to sprint it out for the prize at the top of the climb. Watch the man in the white jersey with the red spots. He's the leader, the king of the mountains, and he needs all of the points he can get before we go into the high mountains tomorrow. Laurent Roux, who got all of his points by a long escape through the Alps, and we don't believe he can do that again, but if he can hang on to his gains, hats off to him, because he's a very inspired Frenchman right now as he sprints clear here to snatch the points at the top of what is a first category mountain here. So the good points to be snatched on the Col de Joux at 68 kilometers, coming clear, the king of the mountains, but he's going to have to just keep the pressure on. That's his teammate alongside him. He won't challenge him, and so he gets the points. Well done, Laurent.
Well, he's going to try as much as he can on these early climbs to keep himself in the points, because he realizes that Laurent Jalabert of France is actually breathing down his neck in that competition. At the start of the day, 21 points separated Jalabert and Roux. But this is remarkable, Phil, the work being done here at the front of the main field by those riders from US Postal Service, while at the back of the course it seems as if these are the 2 men who actually earlier on waited for their team leader, Christophe Moreau, and they are now trying to make their way back into the field. Laurent Bras is one of those riders, and Pascal Lino, a former wearer of the yellow jersey in the Tour de France. They've been caught out by the abandon of Moreau. Very sad for Festina, who started the Tour off magnificently, and right now, as always happens, things are completely falling apart.
Here come the US Postal team riding up towards the top of the climb, dragging the rest of the race. But this is a very interesting formation at the front now. 13 riders have got clear, and Gonzalez de Galdiano, his name too big for the computer even to put on the television, is the rider who is the most dangerous in the breakaway, I think, because this is a rider who can really conquer the Pyrenees in the next 3 days, and I'm sure that Lance Armstrong is aware of this. But a good move that Stuart O'Grady has got himself into, and continues to shock us as we enter the mountainous section of this Tour de France.
Good point, Phil. In fact, Igor Gonzalez de Galdiano with the Once team has just a 6-minute and 2-second deficit unofficially to Lance Armstrong, who is in turn 13 minutes and 7 seconds behind the yellow jersey. So the strategies have just begun to unfold. Stand by. Welcome back. Moments ago, we had pictures from French television on the descent. The riders out front about 45 to 48 miles an hour. On a day like this, it is spectacular to watch these riders in the mountains. Now the peloton is strung out as they make their way down. Earlier, we talked about Stuart O'Grady receiving that hefty bill from his hotel for faxes received from his Australian fans. He can afford it. Thus far, the Credit Agricole team has picked up nearly $37,000 in bonuses. Here are the boys.
Yes, indeed, the peloton has reformed, 12 seconds behind over the top of the climb. The US Postal team have brought everybody back into this race now as they start to descend what is a very tortuous descent here, yet they will still manage to achieve between 75 and 80 kilometers an hour. And I hope those little tiny brake blocks work on the bends.
Very often on stages like this, a rider can go through one complete set of brake blocks. They will be changed. They get worn out more on the wet days in the mountains, but certainly they'll be using them an awful lot on a descent like this. These Pyrenean descents are always very technical and always very dangerous. You can see just off to the left there is absolutely no safety barrier at all. And Johan Brunel, the team manager of US Postal, knows all about that, because he actually took off into the bush like that a few years ago when he was riding for the Rabobank team, and had to climb back up onto the road, and ended up finishing the stage, losing a bit of time and certainly a little bit of skin.
Well, the beauty of the Pyrenees, a great holiday area at this time of the year. Although the weather has not been very holiday-like, I must confess. But on the long drive from the Alps yesterday, the motorways were absolutely jam-packed with holidaymakers. Most of them, of course, not just French, but coming from all over Europe, Scandinavia particularly, because they have a team in the race and are doing very well with that team, I might add. And we're also seeing now on the roadside daily convoys of Australians and South Africans, because South Africa has its very first cyclist in the race this year, Robbie Hunter. Hasn't quite got up to the front yet for the stage victory we've expected from him in the flatter stages, but surviving the Tour very well, and he'll be back in the thick of the action over the last week, we're sure of that. Stuart O'Grady, long-term plans for him, because he's looking to try and win the green jersey, and that would be a first for Australia. He's proving more than just a challenger this year, because he is currently the leader, although Eric Zabel, the man in second place in that competition, dropped earlier on the climb of the Col d'Azur. He's now back in this big field as they freewheel down to the valley below. And that's the nature of the course today. You're either going up or you're going down. Now, you would think that going down would be a nice moment for a rest period, but you are so nervous and tense watching the position of everybody around you, because a mistake by one rider can cause a horrible pile-up, and that's something we don't want to see, of course.
These descents are very long and technical, dangerous, as you say, Phil, but the important thing for the rider, in fact, is to look to the lie of the land. You get an idea of roughly how the corner is going to be by looking to see just exactly how the road bends into the mountains, and some riders are much better at doing that than others, and some men become absolute specialists at this downhill practice. It's something that I always enjoy greatly, going down the hills, because I spent an awful lot of time trying to catch up to the main field in front of me. At the moment, the main field is being led by US Postal Service, and they have a very good descender in their group, and that's George Hincapie. Hincapie spends the early part of the season riding as a team leader when we go to the one-day classics like Gand-Wevelgem, which he won this year, and Paris-Roubaix. But once the Tour de France comes on board, Hincapie's role has to change, and he now rides the US Postal team's shotgun position to look after Lance Armstrong on the flatter stages, and hangs on for as long as possible as he can in the mountains.
Well, a wonderful view from the helicopter. If you're at the back of the peloton today in the Tour, you're a long way from the front, that's for sure, as they go down to the valley now.
Okay, I'll hop in here, fellas. I've been crunching the numbers. Igor Gonzalez de Galeano, who was in that breakaway group, is 5 minutes 58 seconds behind Lance Armstrong. As we started the day, Santiago Botero is the other dangerous character up front. He started the day 8 minutes and 25 seconds behind Lance Armstrong. So the Postal Service will have to watch those two. We'll be back live to France in just a moment. Welcome back to the Tour de France. Still on a descent. Peloton pulling together. The first sprint points of the day were won by Serge Baguet, a Belgian with the Lotto team. The climb points went to the man in the polka dot jersey of the King of the Mountains class leadership, Laurent Roux, with the Jean Delatour team. Amazing watching these riders descend at 45 to 50 miles an hour. You know what the brakes look like on a bicycle. Imagine trying to slow yourself from that kind of speed. Once again, here are Phil Liggett and Paul Sherwen.
So the descent continues. The original breakaway consisted of 13. The peloton have brought back half of them approximately. These, though, are dangling just ahead, and this is the view of the other group. They split up as we look here at David Echeverria. No, it's not, it's Leseca who's sitting at the back. So that original break of 13, although we were told they were caught, they haven't actually been caught, but they're well under control, I would suspect. In the lead group, we've got Vinokourov, Atienza, Bettini, Brogina, Stuart O'Grady, David Echeverria, Patrice Algon, and Botero. And then the chase group were in that group, which is now here. Carlos Sastre, Van der Vaart of Belgium, Roberto Leisaca, and Laurent Roux. They're the second group. Remember, it was Roux that went over the top of the climb to get maximum points, followed by the former leader in the King of the Mountains, Patrice Algon. And then the main field are approximately, and they're now saying, 44 seconds behind the leaders.
It still could all very much come back together on this descent. A very long descent of around about 21 kilometers, and very tricky descent as well. You can see from these corners you have to be a great acrobat on a machine to keep near the front of the pack. A lot of riders put into serious difficulty if they're not able to descend like this. Looking at these corners, they are very sharp, and a lot of them are very difficult because at the moment the roads have been resurfaced in this part of the Pyrenees, and there's a lot of small little pieces of gravel, and if you just touch your brakes a little too hard, you find the back end of your machine locking up, and immediately you're on the ground.
Well, as you can imagine, while the riders go down at speeds of up to 80 kilometers an hour, our timekeepers and people can't get between them, and because they can't keep up with them and work out. But there, they've now done it. So the race is split over 12 seconds between the original breakaway and the peloton, which contains Lance Armstrong, is 44 seconds. And indeed, the yellow jersey, Francois Simon, what a wonderful time he had in the Alps. He got the yellow jersey in the Alps. His brothers came, the former race leader of a Tour when he retired with his broken shoulder blade in the 70s, I think it might have been the 80s, was Pascal Simon. He came and seen him as well, and Régis also visited him.
It was actually 1983 that Pascal had the yellow jersey in the Tour de France, and that was one of the years that I didn't take part in the event. And Pascal was a fantastic bike rider. The other brothers, Jérôme won a stage in 1988 into Strasbourg, and just a couple of years before that, riding on the same team as myself, Régis got the stage into Pau, and that was a good day for Laredo because the morning stage was a stage of just 60. There's been a crash at the back of the main field. Race referees coming in right now to say there's a crash, but this will have been at the back end of the main field, so almost certainly men like Lance Armstrong will be in front of that crash.
Well, I'm not surprised. We've got a bit of problem at the back of the race. We might pick it up in our cameras if there anybody. I'm just listening to the race radio, and they are now saying they have a crash on the right of the road behind. It sounds like a routine fall, nobody getting too excited. As we now look at the leaders, our cameras of course are committed on the descents. We've got camera 1 with the leaders, camera 2 with the chase group, and camera 3 having a time of it, just getting mixed up with the main field. It's not the place I would like to be on roads as narrow as this. You can see you can't afford to make too many mistakes when you look to the right of the road. It's an awful long way down into the valley. The field continues, Paul, the field continues to make its way down to the bottom. And when we get there, we'll go on to the climb of the Col de Coudon, and then we have to do it all over again. There's a long way to go yet on today's stage.
No question about that as we enter the Département de l'Aude. We'll have more information on the crash at the back, but you see the name of the village we're coming through. I'm not going to take a shot at it. 81 kilometers into today's 166.5 kilometer stage. We'll be back live to beautiful France. There was a Rabobank rider involved in that heavy crash at the back of the peloton. We have no further information right now. There's only one rider being attended to, as best we can tell. Welcome back to our extended live coverage. Because of the mountains and all of the drama that takes place in both the Alps and the Pyrenees, we're coming to you with extended live action today, as we will tomorrow. And tomorrow we will be on at 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time live, not 8 as we were today, 7:30 a.m. tomorrow. So join us then as we head up Pla d'Ade, one of the great climbs on the Tour de France. Looking at the Postal Service team, they're in the peloton chasing. In fact, they are pulling the peloton. They are the locomotive trying to catch 2 separate breakaway groups out front. Once again, here's Phil and Paul.
As we look here at the leaders, this is Stuart O'Grady here, right on the head of the race. And I think the descending powers of O'Grady has pulled him away from the group here. And the peloton behind's got Bettini with him. Yes, he's got Paolo Bettini with him. The gap is still unchanged. They're saying 44 seconds back. But O'Grady, is there no stopping this rider this year, or what, Paul? Because here he is in a mountain stage. We are still talking about him.
He's a great bike rider, a tough bike rider who will do anything he can to try and get that green jersey. And the most important thing for him to do is to try and get points on the stages where it's not a real major sprint at the end, because in the rivalry between himself and Eric Zabel, I think Zabel is the slightly better sprinter, but O'Grady is quite prepared to go out on the attack. And today, if he stays off the front of this main field at 129 kilometers covered, there is a sprint point where he could get himself 6 points. He started the day with a 9-point advantage, and if he could get that, well, then he'd extend that out to 15.
Well, Bettini was the man that started the move in the first place on the climb of the Col de Jeu. O'Grady was one of the group that came across to make a group of 13. And now on the descent, Bettini's gone again. And O'Grady this time has kept a close eye on him.
Jonathan Vaughters at the back of the main field. He's trying to pick his way in through the main convoy of cars behind. Vaughters, in fact, in serious difficulty on the first part of the Col de Joux. This is the chaos at the back of the main field, but please bear in mind that all of these drivers do this almost every day of the year. They follow bike races for a living. They know just exactly what they're doing. They've got to be very attentive, not only looking at the road in front of them, but also keeping a very good look in the rear view mirrors behind. Interestingly enough, Vaughters rode a pretty good time trial, Phil, but I think the fact that a rest day came in between the time trial and the Pyrenees, it may well be he's having a hard time digesting that little day off.
As happens so much in a race, the riders, you know, don't like the rest days. They want to keep on with the race. There's a souvenir over the fence. You can get that 2,000 feet below if you want it, by the way, that bottle, as he's just chucked it off the side of the mountain. Anyway, this is Moto 4 now, but he will be at the back of the race normally. Moto 1 follows the leaders. And while they're distracted a little bit by that crash to a Rabobank rider who has not yet been identified to us, but as far as we know has not continued on the mountain, as we cut away from that rather bad picture breakup. We might experience that a bit today because of the nature of the mountains, but the atmospheric conditions have improved enormously. There's no reason to attack on the descent. These riders now are thinking more of self-survival as they twist their way down, and this is nothing to the descent of the Col de Joux, which leads them into the little town of Aix-les-Thermes, and then they start the climb to the finish later on. These are the beautiful gorges. This one is St. George, which abound here in the Pyrenees. Sensational country and so diverse. You can go from the open farmlands of the north to the beaches of the west. To the east side, you've got the Alps. To the south, you have the Pyrenees. France just has just about everything. And now, of course, it's got the greatest bike race in the world, the Tour de France. The field is a massive length. 166 riders started today from the 189 who signed on for the start of the event.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. I don't know if you've covered it, but there's been some good news today. Lance and Kristen Armstrong have announced they're expecting twin girls toward the end of the year. If Armstrong can go on and win his third straight Tour de France, you can expect a lot of young boys named Lance here in France in the years to come. Stay with us. Welcome back to live pictures of the Tour de France here on OLN. I'm Bob Varsha, along with Phil Liggett and Paul Sherwen. Thanks for joining us. We apologize once again for being about 30 minutes late coming on air with our live pictures. As you see the peloton being pulled along by the U.S. Postal Service, 4 of the posties up front, a few more further back. That is where Lance Armstrong is as he started the day 13 minutes and 7 seconds behind Francois Simon in the yellow jersey. Have a report that De Groot from the Rabobank team and Sergei Ivanov, who won the stage that finished in Aix-les-Bains over in the French Alps, were the 2 riders involved. Bram De Groot and Sergei Ivanov. No word on their condition yet. We'll tell you something as soon as we know it. Right now, let's get back to the live race call with Phil Liggett and Paul Sherwen.
As we look now at the 2 breakaways, they're still clear. Paolo Bettini and Stuart O'Grady. We can confirm that the former Russian champion and stage winner in Aix-les-Bains, Ivanov, has abandoned and is leaving the race by ambulance. And the other crash victim, De Groot of Rabobank, no news on him yet, and hopefully he is continuing, but they haven't confirmed what has happened to him. But that's the situation behind the race now, as we have 2 riders out front and the peloton regrouping. And after that descent, Paul, they are now saying it's gone up from 44 seconds to 2 minutes.
That is huge, but you can see why, because if you look at the main field right now, they are all across the road. They've certainly turned off the pressure at the front of the main field, and that is a good move now for Stuart O'Grady, because he will certainly start to build on his advantage, and they will ride on the flat now for around about 14 kilometers into the town of Quillon. And once they go through Quillon, they will start the second climb of the day, the Col de Goudon. It's a second category climb, climbing up to 883 meters, but it is rather a long and tortuous ascent. On the front of the main field, it's still the boys in blue, the posties, the United States Postal Service team of Lance Armstrong. As you get a chance to see the people at the side of the road here, Phil, the Tour de France has certainly not lost any of its popularity at all. There is the yellow service vehicle. Now, the yellow service vehicle there was actually sent forward on the descent because of the dangerous nature of that descent, and it will now pull in behind the two leaders. The two leaders, Paolo Bettini, the Mappe rider in the blue and white jersey at the front there, and the leader of the points competition, Stewie O'Grady. And I cannot take my hat off enough to Stewie O'Grady. He's a man who came into the road side of the sport, having been a multi-titled champion on the track at the World Championships, the Commonwealth Games, which is the equivalent of the Pan American Games, and of course the Olympic Games as well. He's a great bike rider and always prepared to go out and fight. And he said before the start of this year's Tour de France, I want to take the green jersey. Eric Zabel's had it for much too long, the German winning it for the last 5 years in succession.
And they're good friends off the bike, by the way, but they're just great rivals when they're on it, which is the same, one has to say, amongst all of the rides, because even at the start this morning, as the riders rode the first couple of kilometres in neutralised formation, we saw Lance Armstrong laughing and talking with the race leader, Francois Simon. And now here we are, deadly rivals as they start the first Pyrenean stage of 3 today in the Tour de France, and probably the 3 toughest stages we've had for years, all of them finishing on high mountain and none of them finishing down in the valley town. So it's a real tough period for the riders now.
I expect these Pyrenean stages, Phil, to be very short, hard and fast, and the fact is they're not super long stages. Today's stage, for example, is only 166 kilometers, tomorrow 144, and I think we'll see huge battles on these mountains because of the distances. The riders don't want to go too slow in the early part of the stage. Right now, pressure is very much still on in the main field. It's US Postal, and I'm not quite sure why they're chasing so hard right now. They need to take a break for the next 15 or 20 kilometers on the flat part of the course, because next coming up is the big second category climb, where I expect we'll see the main field start to split again, because this is a very tough, hard stage.
The riders welcome to yet another beautiful little French town. Lots of debris on the road because there's been lots of partying overnight. If this town is anything like the hundreds of others that the riders pass through on the route of the 88th Tour de France. This is the U.S. Postal Service team. No doubt there will be Americans in that group, as there have been on every other stage. A crash at the back, one of the Once riders. That is Jose Belocchi, who was third in last year's Tour and started the day in 4th place, just a couple of minutes behind Lance Armstrong. So he had a problem, went down. I wonder if any of that road debris had to do with it. There looked like there was some plastic bags and other plastic debris. Not difficult to bring a rider down when the contact patch on these highly pressurized tires is absolutely tiny. Now we're getting word from race radio that it was in fact a puncture. And that was Belocchi getting back on after some quick service, either from his team or the neutral vehicle. So an aggravating moment for last year's 3rd place finisher, who works his way back up into the peloton. We'll be back live to France in a moment. Back to live pictures of the Tour de France. That was Paolo Bettini going out your picture. This is Stuart O'Grady, who spent 6 days in the yellow jersey of race leader. And they are tempted to be caught by this man. This is Vicente Garcia Acosta, Spaniard with the Ibanesto.com team, trying to bridge up and join that group who ride 2 minutes and 35 seconds ahead of the peloton. Now, earlier, we told you about the crash between Sergei Ivanov and Bram de Groot. Ivanov was taken off in an ambulance and has withdrawn from the Tour de France. We now are being told that Bram de Groot has been airlifted out of the nearest opportunity to get a helicopter to the ground. So both riders injured seriously enough to be taken to the hospital, and we'll try to update that situation as we go along. We're down to 163 riders remaining in the Tour de France. Once again, here's Phil and Paul.
Still the Australian at the front, Stuart O'Grady. He's setting a very fast tempo. This man who comes from Adelaide, where he's a pretty popular figure, having twice won his home tour, the Tour Down Under, is now really on a flyer in this year's Tour de France. He's got good company in Paolo Bettini, who rode extremely well in Asia as well, which was in the Tour of Malaysia, which is known as the Tour de Langkawi. Now, if this rider gets across, Garcia Acosta, he is a very good, aggressive Spanish rider who can also climb. So that would give 3 very good riders up the front.
Won a stage of the Tour de France last year on the 14th of July, Bastille Day, but he's got a big order in front of him to try and pull back 2.5 minutes. These roads are very difficult indeed. You see his advantage over the main field right now is only 20 seconds. And it's a pretty crazy move, but these kind of moves can actually work on the mountain stages, especially when the main field are not too keen and putting a lot of pressure at the front end of the main field. Here is the US Postal Service team, and all of the teammates of Lance Armstrong today, Phil, seem to be riding quite strong. That would indicate, in fact, that Tyler Hamilton, who was having serious stomach problems a couple of days ago, may well have been happy with that rest day yesterday, and he could very much have recovered. The back of the main field, CSC World Online, and there is number 131, Jaja, Laurent Jalabert.
Not far from his home area, is he?
Not far from his home area. We went through Mazamet not too long ago, and although that is his home area, he spends most of his time nowadays living in Switzerland. And I think that would be for tax reasons.
More than likely. But Jaja back in his region now, and many times, especially when we get to the start of the last climb for the first half kilometre, they've all written Jaja in support to give him the oomph he needs to try and get to the top first today. He's won 2 stages this year and having one of his best Tours de France, and that coming after serious injury in February, where he really questioned whether he would even ride a bike again. And now there you are. He's having a great Tour de France in the gorges now of the Pyrenees. And beautiful they are too, as we look out at the best seat in the house in the helicopter. Although it's a bit dizzy up there on these occasions, the pilot really does have to keep his wits about him as he tries to locate the leaders of the Tour de France with those cameras on the plane or the helicopter, and not always in visibility as good as this either. Absolutely superb now. The wind coming from the northwest today, gusting, believe it or not, up to 55 miles an hour, 90 kilometers an hour. And that is a pretty tough gust. So the riders are at the moment picking up cross to tailwind, which is going to help. 2 leaders in green, Stuart O'Grady, and in the blue there, Paolo Bettini. Latest time check, 2 minutes 40 over the peloton, 2:20 over Garcia Acosta.
No question about it. An absolutely gorgeous part of Spain. Thus far on tour, we've had the influence of the Belgian and the Dutch and the German. Now it is the Spanish who have their turn, or more appropriately, the Basque. The Basque country is just a few miles away across the border. We'll be back to France. Welcome back to our OLN live coverage of the Tour de France. Today it is stage 12 from Perpignan to Aix-les-Thermes. I'm Bob Barsha with Phil Liggett and Paul Sherwen. Here are the boys.
This is him, Vicente Garcia Acosta. 2 minutes 20 the gap. 2 minutes 40 now back to the main field, and it is stretching. Now this man could spend a little while in no man's land, but he is a better climber than the 2 riders ahead. But we've still got to continue. It's a false flat really rather than downhill, but we are losing height gradually as we go into the town of Quillon, and then we climb out of the town, and that's where we would expect Garcia Acosta to make some ground, carrying the scars there of a crash earlier in the Tour. Thankfully that's all behind him now, and sadly we've no further news to tell you either on De Groot, except that the last information, he was due to be airlifted off the mountain by helicopter, which means he's certainly abandoned the Tour, along with Sergei Ivanov, who's also crashed on the descent of the Col de Gers. No update on those 2 fallers at all, as we're now 66 kilometers from the finish, about 42 miles, and the gap confirmed at 2 minutes 30. 2 minutes 40, sorry, to the main field, 2 minutes 20 to the chase-up. Little food sack there coming off from Bettini, throwing it away. Racing into the lovely conditions now, and that'll be very warm where they are just now. It'll become a little bit chilly on the mountains again, but nonetheless, this is perfect racing conditions now.
Absolutely superb, and one would never have expected this at the start of the day this morning, because I thought we were walking out into an autumnal fog. This man here is the chaser at the moment, and in fact he's not gaining a whole lot of time on the 2 leaders, but he is gaining time on the main field. They're 25 seconds behind him. The main field 3 minutes behind the 2 leaders, O'Grady and Bettini. And the next stopping point on the day for these riders will be the town of Quillon, where they'll be able to take on board food and drinks. And that may well be where this man, Vicente Garcia Acosta, gets a chance to integrate the leading group of 2, because we will then start the very long climb, a 13-kilometer second category climb of the Col de Coudon, which will climb up from around about 300 meters in altitude to 900 meters near the summit. and that could be the advantage of the rider from Spain.
Well, the breakaway of 3 minutes now means that Stuart O'Grady has climbed up today from his 10th overall to 5th overall. And that just shows you that this man will not give up. He wants his best finish ever in Paris this year, as well as possibly win a big competition like the Green Jersey. There's the world champion. We haven't seen him. He's enjoying his tour now. Look, what he recognises straight away. Spot that.
Johan Museeuw having a good time in the Tour de France. He actually swore that he would never come back to the Tour a few years ago. You can see he's got the World Championship bands on his shoulders there. And he is a great bike rider. Strange thing about Johan, he's got a very fragile morale for such a tough bike rider. He actually said he didn't want to race anymore a few years ago, and then he was persuaded to ride for the Belgian national team at the World Championships in Lugano. And all of a sudden he comes out and gets himself a rainbow jersey, and then he decided to ride for a couple more years. He then said that he would never come back to the Tour de France, and I think he's basking here, Phil, in the glory of what is really the most magnificent bike race in the world.
Well, he said he's going to retire next year after the most famous of races, Paris-Roubaix. But he's even changed his mind over that now, and he's saying he might ride till the end of the year because the World Championships are in Belgium. So we'll take his word for it when it happens. Back to the leaders now. The cheers for the two men who are blazing the trail on this, the 12th stage of the Tour de France. 166 kilometres from Perpignan out on the coast, heading now inland into the foothills of the Pyrenees.